it was a very unexpected development once the North Runway went operational on the 22nd of August, but we started to engage with both the regulatory authorities and our neighbours, immediately. I suppose that we became aware of this. I suppose just for a little bit of context, the determination of a flight path off a new runway is an incredibly complex and highly regulated development, and I suppose we would have engaged back in 2016 with the various regulatory authorities when we were trying to do our modelling around understanding the potential impacts that the new runway was going to have on the neighbours. We would have, I suppose, at that point in time had an understanding that, the interpretation of ICAO's safety direction would have resulted in aircraft having to fly 1 nautical mile after takeoff and then banking right. And all of our modelling, again, engaged with regulators at the time, was based on that. I suppose move forward 6 years later, when the runway was about to become operational, the regulatory authorities at that point in time had to stand back and actually develop the flight path for the runway. That wasn't a process that we were necessarily involved in, and I suppose there was a change in, once you came to actually determining the relevant flight path, there was a change in some of the criteria that were applied, and I suppose, in simple terms, that meant that aircraft had to reach a certain height and then they could turn right rather than going a specified distance. So I suppose that is, in simple terms, what gave rise to the deviation in the flight path that materialised at the time. It was a surprise to us. We began our engagement with the regulatory authorities immediately at the time. And this, as I said, it's a complex and highly regulated process. And unfortunately, it has required a significant amount of engagement with the ANSP, the SRD, IAA, and, a lot of work needs to happen to make sure that the ultimate flight path that is here, that also needs to be promulgated and, uploaded to the various aircraft and pilots who use the airport. So it's a very complex and, unfortunately, time-consuming process. We started that immediately. It has been ongoing. We've been intensively engaged with all of the relevant authorities to try and get this resolved as quickly as possible. And thankfully, we're now in a position to communicate to neighbours that the 23rd of February is when the flight path should revert to something that's more closely aligned to what we would have originally modelled.
And are those 2016 models, are they? Is that what you're saying?
They are going to be very closely aligned to the modelling that would have been done and consulted on with both neighbours and the planning authority at that time, yeah.
Okay, and when will residents get to see those?
I believe that the IAA have actually published details of that flight path earlier on today. So, again, as we move closer to finalising this process, the various communication around what that flight path is, the impact it's going to have, will become apparent over the immediate.
Okay, and in terms of the assessment of that impact and insulating properties, when does that happen?
That's going to be ongoing from now, and it is something we have been considering clearly as we've worked with the authorities to try and realign the flight path to what had been originally anticipated. We have been considering ourselves the potential impact, and look, as we understand that, that becomes clearer over the next while, we will be considering what mitigation measures can be made available to any houses that are impacted where that hadn't been previously advertised to them.
And